Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our second annual JustUs Dialogue Series and Symposium. My name is Marissa McKeever. This series and symposium is hosted by and sponsored by the Office for Economic Development for the Johns Hopkins University and Health System. The inaugural JustUs Dialogue Series launched as a forum to connect with our community during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and nationwide social unrest in August of 2020. The goal of the series is to advance conversations and drive institutions, individuals, and communities to action around racial justice and economic impact. Over the course of this month, we have invited business leaders, philanthropists, academic experts, and advocates who have engaged in meaningful dialogues around our symposium's central questions. We talked about this from the perspective of education, entrepreneurship, and today I'm excited to speak with you all about employment justice. I am joined by an amazing powerhouse panel, and I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists. So if our panelists could join me on the stage. Excellent. I'd like to begin by introducing Emily M. Dickens, Chief of Staff, Head of Government Affairs, and Corporate Secretary for the Society for Human Resource Management, Maurice Jones, CEO of OneTen, and Darah McCray Okeke, Founder and President of EPIQ Consulting. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm excited to have you with us. So we're going to get started here. I want to allow our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. As you introduce yourself, I'd also like you to answer one question. And Darah, I'm going to start with you. The question is, how can anchor institutions collaborate with organizations to create wealth equity in communities? Darah?
Excellent. Thank you, Marissa. I'm so excited to be here today. And hello, everyone. My name is Darah McCray Okeke. I am the founder and president of EPIQ, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting company. Part of my services also include providing negotiation advice and compensation navigation for individual clients. By way of background, I'm an employment lawyer. I've been practicing for nearly 15 years, and my practice has always focused on issues of equal employment opportunity, anti-discrimination and anti-harassment, as well as overall workplace belonging, fairness, and justice. Now, as to the question, I think in order for anchor institutions to collaborate with organizations to create wealth equity, they first have to recognize that there's a problem. You know, the racial wealth gap is growing, and many talented, productive, and highly ambitious people from underrepresented populations are falling through the cracks. So I think step one is recognizing that a problem exists and being willing to face the reality of its significant impact and deploy the necessary resources to try to reach a solution.
Thank you, Darah. Maurice?
Marissa, thanks for having me with you, and it's a pleasure to be with with all the panelists. So I'm Maurice Jones. I'm the CEO of OneTen. We're a coalition now of about 65 companies, about 100 talent development organizations, all of which are coming together dedicated to the proposition of hiring and advancing and promoting 1 million Black talent who don't yet have 4-year degrees into family-sustaining careers and jobs over the next 10 years. Look forward to talking more about that. With respect to anchor institution opportunities to collaborate, to advance wealth and prosperity and the like, and equity, let me just mention 2 or 3 things. There's a lot that anchor institutions can do. Let me just say that to start with. But let me highlight 2 or 3 things. One, look, anchor institutions are among the institutions in a locality, in a region, in an urban area that have jobs. And so one of the things that anchor institutions can ensure that they do to partner and collaborate with the community is to hire folks from the place where they're anchored, right? And to collaborate with organizations in the community to source talent and to get talent prepared for your great opportunities. So since we're talking about employment, let's put that front and center. Hire and promote people who are in the places where you are actually living, working, and doing the like. Second thing that I would say that anchor institutions can do is to make sure that they are collaborating with the community and working directly with community-based organizations. So making grant investments, making debt investments, making equity investments in community-based organizations where that anchor institution works. Serving on boards, doing volunteer service, really getting involved in the organizations that are attempting to move communities forward. And then the third thing that I would say is get involved in the public policy issues. Collaborate with government around public safety, helping to educate the children, helping to make sure that folks are healthy. Get involved in the public sphere as well as the private sphere in the places where you are working. You need the public sector and the private sector if you're really going to have shared prosperity. And anchor institutions have an obligation and opportunity to be involved in both spaces.
Excellent. We are off to a good start. Emily, what do you have to add? Tell us a little bit about your work and what anchor institutions can do.
Well, thank you. I'm Emily Dickens, and as head of government affairs here at SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, we are the largest association representing the interests of those who are HR professionals with over 300,000 plus members. And in my space, I have government affairs as well as other external affairs and our global policy as well. And I used to work at an anchor institution and for a system that had 17 anchor institutions. So this question that you ask is particularly of interest to me. And I will say, Maurice, you took two of my answers. It was so easy for me to say, give them jobs. And so I'm going to let you have that. So I'll, as a person who used to be in charge of government and community affairs at an institution that was an anchor institution, I'll say, buy some land in that community. Create housing opportunities that are adjacent to that campus, making them affordable. If you're the owner, you can make that housing affordable for your employees. When I was an employee at Duke University, they did that. And then again, when I was at Fayetteville State University, we bought land in and around the institution with the help of some federal funds. So leverage those federal funds and leverage your federal funding like programs for Gear Up and others so that you can bring the students and the next generation of employees onto your campus. It's important that those students get exposed and see what it looks like, what, you know, how they can, how higher education looks, how they can have access to it. And on that piece, I'll say two other things: the education to employment pipeline, providing professional development opportunities for people in the community who don't necessarily work on your campus. I think that's important, providing it for free or as little as cost as possible for people who can then actually get training they need so they can move up the career pipeline. And then the last thing, when we talk about E-Square, the education to employment pipeline, I would say be seen in the K through 12 arena around your campus. It's important that you are talking to professors as well as talking to teachers and providing them the resources they need, especially in low wealth schools, so that they can have access to some of the resources on campus. You're preparing the next generation of workforce, and right now we have a huge vacuum between the preparation those students have when they leave the higher education, when they leave K-12, actually going into the workforce.
You all are bringing up some amazing points, very clear points, very what seemingly should be easy pathways for anchor institutions to activate. But obviously we know that there are some problems. So I'm interested in getting to the historical root of some of these issues. As we consider the topic of economic justice within this context of employment, I heard recognizing the problem, hire, promotion, land, housing, public policy, collaboration. As we consider this, what do you all believe is the most pressing issue that we face in this context today? And whomever wants to kick off with the response there can start.
I'm happy to go. So, in my mind and kind of based on my experience and the work that I've done, both as a lawyer and a founder that provides advice and consulting to many anchor institutions, I think one of the biggest, if not the biggest problem is the lack of advancement, especially for employees of color. We often get stuck in middle management positions and deemed ineligible for promotions to leadership roles because of arbitrary reasons that are often stoked in bias and discrimination, such as a lack of executive presence, whatever that might be, failure to collaborate, or what's considered poor communication skills. But a lot of these reasons given are not based in fact. They're based on stereotypes about how women and people of color are or how we should behave in a workplace setting. And I think we can't elevate and we can't graduate to those higher compensation levels and begin to close the racial wealth gap if we don't have the opportunity to advance to more senior roles.
Thank you, Darah. Emily, Maurice, anything to add there?
Let me add one other let me add another challenge or opportunity. We talked about anchor institutions really having an incredible opportunity with respect to providing quality job opportunities for the community in which the anchor institution exists and resides. One of the places where anchor institutions have an opportunity to lead and to remove a barrier is to move to a skills-first approach to hiring and to promoting. We have a lot of job opportunities that are actually unattainable for particularly communities of color, Black communities and other, because they have with them a requirement that people have a 4-year degree, irrespective of whether that 4-year degree is related to the skills that are necessary to do that job or not. What we have been encouraging and working with employers to do at OneTen is to remove that 4-year degree credential where it's not related to the skills necessary to do a job, and move to a skills-first approach to hiring, a skills-first approach to promoting, understanding that actually people can come about skills, the skills necessary to be great on the job through various pathways. It might be a 4-year credential, but it could also be a 8-week boot camp or military experience or other work experience or training or community college training or 2-year HBCU. We've got to understand that the real issue here is what skills does that person need on day one? What skills will that person need beyond that? And what are the multiple pathways to coming about those skills? And let's recognize all of them and embrace all of them and give folks a chance. That credential disproportionately adversely impacts communities of color. Anchor institutions can lead in showing folks how to do this and in doing it themselves.
Thank you. Emily?
And I'll just add, I think both of my colleagues point to critical pieces of the employment journey. And I know I've seen institutions where from the top, the boss has said, the CEO has said, I believe in giving everyone a shot. I think the bigger issue is we got to look at people managers, because ultimately your day-to-day experience and the hiring is controlled by the people managers. A lot of people say it's controlled by HR, but ultimately the candidates that come forward to the people manager, they make that final decision. So I think it's critical that the institution really makes sure that they are training their people managers. Most of us, one day we were an individual contributor, the next day we were a people manager. And so we're responsible for that person's experience. We're responsible for their ultimate elevation to their next step. And if people managers aren't properly trained, we're going to continue to have these problems. I don't care if we've taken away the fact that you should get that you don't need a 4-year degree, or even if we're saying that we really are supportive of women in the workplace. If that direct line manager is not bought in, is not properly trained, then we won't be able to make the changes we need.
Thank you. I mean, what I'm hearing is this is multifactorial. There are so many lanes and perspectives that we should be looking at and attacking this issue from. Maurice, I want to build on one of the points that you made earlier, and I want to read a data point. According to Mercer, 64% of entry-level workers are white, while 85% of executive positions are. So what's the barrier between job entry and job promotion?
Yeah, well, I think Emily was hitting on one big barrier, right? It's people, right? It's bias. I mean, plain and simple. It's, do all talent, when they come through the door, have an opportunity to thrive? Are there mentors and coaches there? Are there transparent career pathways? Are there managers investing them? Are there managers investing in their growth and who believe in them? At the end of the day, that means that disparity means we've got a flaw or a set of flaws in the promotion systems. And it usually starts with the people managers, with the hiring managers. And that's a cultural piece. Companies are working on this across the board. But I want to just to stress something that Emily just said. Sometimes we dream of systems that are so perfect that the people never have to be good. Mm. The bottom line is people at the end of the day trump every system. So we've got to have people who are trained and who are supported and who have the abilities to actually make sure that this gap does not occur.
I hear you, Maurice, and I agree. And Darah, that gets to your earlier point about bias. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that Maurice said. I think that the barriers between job entry and promotion are bias and discrimination, period, point blank. You know, for the most part, I don't believe that recruiting professionals and hiring managers are intentionally discriminating against candidates for new jobs and for promotions. However, we are all biased. You know, we all make certain assumptions and draw certain conclusions about people who are different from us. And this bias arises from the world that we live in and the messages and the attitudes and stereotypes that we adopt from everything that we see and experience. But I think what's really important is that we not only acknowledge that bias exists and that these recruiters and hiring managers and other decision makers have this implicit bias, but we have to take steps to break it. And like Maurice said, we have to really acknowledge that there is a problem and that it's about the people. It's not necessarily about having perfect systems if the people are the ones making the decisions ultimately. So I think acknowledging that bias exists, identifying it, and then creating concrete steps and measures to break it in the moment so that it doesn't lead to prejudicial decisions and outcomes is really going to be key.
I want to stick here with the role of people that all three of you all are honing in on. Emily, what effect does executive level diversity have on hiring practices within our organizations and the overall culture of the rest of the company?
Well, you know, it's often I hear people talk about our executive team. We have a CEO who's an African-American male. I'm an African-American female. We have 2 Hispanics. We've got 4 women. It's extremely diverse. And that I can say there was some intention there, but I can also say as we've hired in the last 4 years here, it's been about getting the best person and to making sure everyone had diverse backgrounds. And your staff sees that. They see that there's this intention there, that you are clear about that, And they also see that maybe I can invite my person also who I know when we have a job opening, and that this could be an environment where my recommendation would feel comfortable as well. It is about culture and the culture that you set from the top. So seeing, it's so funny, David Stern, former commissioner of the NBA, used to be on the board of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. And he used to say to us that he was the chief diversity officer. And it's something my CEO says all the time. You have to see it from the top, that that CEO is making decisions that welcomes inclusion and in diversity organization. So that's the first thing, is you need to see it in that leadership team. And then as members of the leadership team, we here have an open door policy. And so when we're not on the road or in meetings, we absolutely have the opportunity to talk to people who look like us, who want to talk to us, who want to recommend people. We don't have rules against hiring relatives here. We don't have rules against who you date here. Everybody has to be an adult. There are all these kind of arbitrary barriers to bringing in people from their own networks. And so I think that's the other thing, is once you bring in people from different backgrounds, everyone's network is different, and they bring in people who are diverse from their networks. So I think that is another way that you can make sure you're seeing diversity, and you're seeing not just diversity. For us, it's about inclusion, that once you get the numbers, once you get the people there, they feel like there's an opportunity for them in the organization. And so that's one of the key pieces that I would say, when you're looking at from the top, you see that trickle down, because I'm going to my network, and then the people that work for me are going into their network, and they feel comfortable recommending people who look like them, who have those experiences for the organization.
Darah, how would you build on that? What's the impact of executive level diversity on culture and on hiring practices?
So, unfortunately, I think for a significant number of organizations and institutions, there's not much of an impact yet, because their executive teams aren't truly diverse. Having one woman here or there, or one person of color here or there, is not enough to overhaul a legacy of whiteness within an institution. And so while there can be, I think, a positive impact on culture when you have someone who's underrepresented on the executive team, because, if you can see it, you can be it, of course. I think that what you really need is that tipping point. You need true diversity, true representation of people from marginalized communities before you see a real shift in mindsets and a shift in culture and a sense of belonging.
Thank you. I want to just take a moment to pause and recognize our audience. Please type your questions in the Zoom chat or on Facebook in the comments. We'll raise them throughout the conversation today. You can also text your questions to 22333 and type JHUWL in the message. Thank you all for your comments here. I think it helps us set the stage for the historical issues that we are continuing to have to grapple with. But I want to talk a little bit more about some other areas of our current landscape that have a role in this conversation. Emily, I want to start with you. How have pandemic-born innovations, such as virtual work, affected the culture and promotion practices of our businesses?
So there are some cultures, people who are telling us that it really has been a good thing. I worry so much about the opportunity for collaboration and the opportunity to be seen unexpectedly. How many of us have been in the office minding our business and got pulled into a meeting that wasn't on your calendar for the day? And in that meeting, you end up with a stretch project. And that project that becomes something bigger and allows you an opportunity to get in front of people who are decision makers, who now get to see you for your work. They see you working, they're working with you. So I worry so much, and we're seeing data because, again, we go back to that people manager component I talked about. It's been so fast and so quick the way this came about. Training and retraining managers how you supervise in these circumstances, right? How you make sure that you're treating the people who are in the office as equitably as you're treating the people who are now remote. That training doesn't come overnight. And we've been so focused on all the other things that we had to do in terms of returning to the office, keeping the business afloat, that there is a gap right now, and our people managers are really struggling to make sure they're creating opportunities. And so I say to people, it is nice to say that you can be remote, but if you're working in a hybrid environment, you've got to make sure that you're finding opportunities to be seen outside of that screen that they're seeing you on. So even if coming in the office unexpectedly on days, coming in for key meetings, because until we get to a point where we got enough managers trained to understand that for that particular business, there is no real difference whether I'm working at home doing this or I'm working remotely. I think that we've got to kind of give people some grace to figure out how to do this well. The other thing is we got to also understand that everyone can't work remote right now. And many of the jobs that don't require remote work or won't allow remote work have people who look like us in those jobs. And so we need to also focus more on what work experience has been for them. I'm hoping we can touch on this later, but there's a whole mental health component to these people who work the entire time in their workplaces while some of us were working remotely. So I think it's got to be understanding that the experiences are different and that you're going to have to give a little, even though you love remote work, and right now give your managers some grace so they can figure out how they can manage equitably in these very much changed circumstances.
Thank you, Emily. Maurice, did you have any thoughts on that? How might you build on this?
Let me go at it. So first, let me give you a caveat. I'm a naive optimist. Let me just say that at the outset. So with that, let me tell you what I'm seeing. We've got about 65 companies in the OneTen coalition. What I'm seeing is, and our aspiration is, a hire and promote 1 million Black talent. What I'm seeing is companies actually utilizing virtual job opportunities to reach more Black talent. So I actually think there's some huge opportunity that the virtual world is presenting for quality jobs for Black talent who may not live in Salt Lake City or places where there are big operations, but there are jobs. So I think that's one really, really positive trend that I'm seeing is the ability now for more jobs to become virtual and to become more accessible to Black talent and other talent of color and other talent that may not live physically where many of these companies have located large operations. So again, my naive optimism tells me there's huge opportunity here.
Thank you. And Darah, I actually want to build on this with my question to you, Darah. How can we use the benefits of such innovations like virtual work to improve the long-term diversity of American business leadership? And how might we avoid some of those negative pandemic-born trends in the future as we transition back to the normal workplace?
Yeah. So, I think for a lot of us, I kind of have a different view of this new virtual world, and I see it as allowing us to develop deeper connections with our colleagues. There is something about kind of sitting on a Zoom or a Google Meet and peering into someone else's living room or their home office that really just brings you closer together. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with colleagues of mine and peers of mine that have been a lot deeper and more meaningful than those conversations we were having when it was just about business all in the office. So I think this closeness that we've been able to create among some people is going to allow decision makers to really learn more about their diverse colleagues, to understand them as people, to help to broaden their perspectives and to see them as promotion eligible talent that deserves to be invested in. I think also going to the point that Maurice made, for many businesses, you can now work remotely from almost anywhere. And so this has had a huge impact on the ability to hire diverse talent from previously unexplored areas where they're readily available. So I think that's something that absolutely has to continue. Even if we do return to the office in some type of full-time or hybrid mode, it's really important that businesses continue to have these new cities and new locales where they're looking for underrepresented talent. As to the negative aspects that we've seen since the pandemic and going to this virtual world, I think Emily hit on a really great point talking about the inclusiveness of meetings and making sure that we're treating people in the office in an equitable manner as compared to people who are working from home or working remotely. Sometimes in a Google Meet or in a Zoom conversation, it can turn into a free-for-all where everyone's kind of talking at the same time and no one's really listening, or it's hard to tell, who's representing what. And so I think we're going to have to really think hard about training on inclusive meetings and how we make sure that everyone feels heard, that diverse perspectives and voices are heard, and that we're giving everybody an opportunity to participate fully.
Thank you. I want to add a question from our audience because I think it aligns with what we're talking about here. We've heard from you all some of those barriers to this new virtual work environment that we're in, but we've also heard about the opportunity that it brings as well, particularly around advancement opportunities for people of color. So the question from the audience is, the panel briefly discussed problems regarding lack of advancement for people of color. What do you recommend people do to increase confidence in negotiating, whether it's for a promotion or salary increase?
I love this. Yeah, I love this question. One of my mantras when it comes to negotiations is to feel the fear and do it anyway. I think especially when it comes to the racial wealth gap, it is so important for us to recognize our collective why as to why it's important to negotiate and to advocate for yourself. Not only do we want to provide a stable life for our families and loved ones, but collectively we want to work together to close the wealth gap. We want to set an example for other people of color to be able to advocate for themselves as well, and ultimately build wealth within communities of color. And so I think kind of reflecting on that why is a really helpful way to build your own confidence and to start feeling more comfortable with advocating and negotiating for yourself. I also think you have to do your research. It's so important that we take advantage of the tools and the resources that are available to us when it comes to negotiating, whether it's a job offer, a promotion or a raise, or even a severance package. It's so critical that we negotiate all of those things. And there are many resources available, whether it is public pay scales. There are several jurisdictions and states around the country that now have laws that require employers to publish wage ranges or pay scales for roles that they're hiring for. So it's important to know if you're in one of those cities or in one of those states that has such laws. Also, phone a friend or a colleague. That's a really helpful way that you can get more inside information about what you should expect when it comes to compensation packages for particular roles. And then finally, just ask. It doesn't hurt to go to the recruiter, to go to the hiring manager or the HR professional involved in the process and ask, how do you value this role? What have you budgeted for this position? What do you think is an appropriate compensation package for this role? The worst that they can say is no. And often if they're in that jurisdiction that requires some sort of disclosure, then you'll get the information that you need so that you can have context to know how to more effectively negotiate. I'll stop there. I could go on for a while about negotiations, but I'll stop and let others add as well.
Add two things as well. I think there are two things I think that prepare you, whether you get the answer you want or not when you're going into negotiation. And so it sets you up so that you can go elsewhere. Because I think one of my issues, first of all, you got to know your stuff. There's nothing worse than people. There are a lot of people who say, I want this promotion, I want that, and then they don't really know their stuff. And I'm not asking you to know more than the person who's not necessarily your color, because I think a lot of people say, well, they only have to know so much. When you know your stuff, your confidence is at a whole other level. No one can question you. And that means that you are a viable option, not just for the organization you're in, but for the next organization. And that takes me to my second point. You got to have that discussion about stability versus risk. I think there was an earlier research terms, 85% of people are in leadership positions are white, and as opposed to them being only 60-something% of the employment population, right? The issue is, can you get to the point where you can say, I've got stability here, but if I take this risk and I go outside this company I've been sitting in this middle management job in for the last 10 years and take this risk, am I prepared? Can I do it? Can I talk myself and have myself into it and have the confidence to do it? I think that's the big issue. Is a lot of times we talk ourselves out of taking the risk, and there are others who are just bigger risk takers. And that risk sometimes means you got to leave a state. That means you got to leave an industry. But if you've got that skill set and you've got confidence in your skills, you can really move and make that jump that really can contribute to your wealth.
Just a quick follow-up. Data show that Black talent and other talent of color are less likely to raise their hand for promotions and advanced opportunities than our white counterparts, similarly situated and being prepared. So let me just add, raise your hand, right? It starts there. Raise your hand, and don't wait until you think you are 100% ready before you do that. And the data suggests that that's what we do. And we've got to understand that everybody grows into an opportunity. No one is 100% ready. Don't wait for that moment.
These are amazing tips spoken from our experts in the field. Lean into it, know your value, know your worth, raise your hand, all active actions that we can take. Emily, I want to go back to you for a moment and talk about the Great Resignation and what we see happening across the country. So can you tell us a little bit about the cause of this ongoing Great Resignation and how is it affecting hiring practices today?
Right. So right now, labor shortage is the #1 issue affecting HR departments. 81% of HR departments saying that they are dealing with this issue of people just wanting to do something different who are leaving. And I can tell you, this is why people are leaving. For better compensation, about 53% of them. For better work-life balance, about 42%. For better benefits, 36%. For career advancement, 33%. And career change is the same number. And then others are finally retiring. Remember, we have a whole generation of people who've worked much longer than we thought they would. And so what I just was talking to ABC News the other day, and I said to them, this is a great opportunity we're seeing for women of color who are mostly in the white collar communities. You're seeing an opportunity for them to step in and say, I'm ready. I'm the person who can fill in for this spot now that it's vacant. And companies are saying yes, and they're getting paid money that they wouldn't have gotten paid in other circumstances. So, but I also say to them, you got to do it now before this window closes. We've not seen a recession, a real recession, in over a decade, and everything is pointing to the fact that we can see this in the lower half of 2023. So now is the time for you to take advantage and raise your hand, as Maurice said, if you think you're ready, because the vacancies exist. If you're taking on stretch assignments and other jobs when people leave, there's also an opportunity to add those duties and then to ask for what you want to be paid for those duties. So there's opportunity here. But there's also we're also seeing people who have worked in lower wage positions who are tired. As I mentioned earlier, they worked the entire time that we were home. We're all remote, and they were still going to work every day. I think about my friends in the city who work for the MTA, right? And they're tired, they're mentally exhausted, and they've saved just enough right now to take some time off and then to decide to get training to do something different. And this is a great opportunity for people of color, because you've got people who were working as housekeepers, who were working in traditional blue collar positions, who are going back to school, getting professional development, and they're going to be ready for those new high skill jobs that many of these companies need. You also see companies going into the community and training these people for the jobs that they need. So you're seeing more companies, not less dependent on institutions of higher education to provide the training, but they're doing the training themselves. And so I think that's critically important, and it's a great opportunity for people of color right now in this environment. But again, I'm warning everyone, we're seeing this turnover and people are saying this can go on for another year. There's going to be a point when your employer says, look, this position's been has been open for 6 months. Maybe I can do without it. And so I'm hoping that our people will be sitting in a position to say, well, then give me some of those duties and let me negotiate before the window closes and the economy takes a turn.
Thank you. I think what I'm hearing here is key steps on activating the community. What I've heard from all of you out throughout this conversation is that there are some key opportunities for anchor institutions, but also for individuals to step into either their next steps or their promotion. What are their goals around salary increases, et cetera? You all are all giving steps around how to activate what we're talking about here in terms of wealth building. So I want to stick on this point of activating the community and really dig into why this is important. Maurice, I want to start with you and hone in on this point around diverse business leadership. Does diverse business leadership create diverse wealth building?
Yes, for a number of reasons, some of which were hit on, right? Diverse business leadership has a better chance of impacting the diversity of the entire enterprise than if you don't have it, number one. Diverse business leadership tends to also enable you, and this is where I want to bring the community, the relationships and the connections and the social capital and the networking. When you've got diverse business leadership, your networking is also likely to be more diverse. And so you're going to be sourcing candidates for jobs, good jobs, from a more diverse series of channels than if you don't have it. So I think there are multiple ways that diverse leadership makes it more likely that you're going to have more shared prosperity than without it, and more connections with diverse organizations in the community, whether they're vendors or sources of talent or community-based organizations. That's likely to be one of the results of having diverse business leadership. So yes, ultimately is my answer to that question.
There's a ripple effect that occurs from that. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Darah, do you have anything to add to those comments?
I fully agree with Maurice. I constantly say, if you can see it, you can be it. And I think that when we as people of color reach executive levels of leadership, we feel this shared responsibility to reach back and to pull others forward with us. And so we become advocates, we become mentors, we become sponsors, and really invest in underrepresented and marginalized groups to help them develop and to help to promote them and get them to reach the next level. So I think that feeling of that shared connectedness and that shared responsibility is one of the other reasons why having diverse leadership will lead to wealth building among diverse communities.
I want to pull in, Emily, a question from the audience to connect to this conversation we're having around the linkage between diverse business leadership and building diverse wealth. How should we be preparing recent college and graduate school graduates to navigate entering the workforce?
Ooh, that's a big one, right? I think I would say they've got to make sure they take advantage of the opportunity to be in the workforce while they're still in school. So there are tons of apprenticeship and internship opportunities. We talk about that a lot, but we really have to take advantage of that. You've got to get exposed to the workplace before you have to be in it full time. And the government, actually, federal government has a focus now on apprenticeships, even for our high school aged individuals. So you can start that early as well. There are jobs, there's an organization called Jobs for America's Graduates, JAG, which has a board full of governors who are trying to figure out how they can get high school students trained in the critical jobs that their areas need. So I think you really got to get some work experience. You just can't just go into this blind. I think the other thing is so important. I talk about this education to employment pipeline is business owners really have to engage with our teachers and our college professors and teachers. And we've got to keep our curriculum up to date on what's happening in the workplace. It is, I'm an HBCU advocate, and one of the things we talk about so much is you got to make those connections with the local community and with the industries for the students you're trying to teach. And you can't keep using that same syllabus you've been using for the last 20 years because the workplace is training. And so a good way to leverage your anchor institution is to have those professors sitting in, not just going to the chamber meeting so you all can have coffee and talk about what's going on in the community, but really sitting and using the expertise of those businesses to develop your curriculum so that you are training those individuals for what is currently going on in the workplace. I think that is critically important. Internships in those organizations, critically important. And even internships, the federal government has a number of summer internship programs. When we were with the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, it was one of the things that we're most proud of is creating these and leveraging these internship programs for the students at historically Black colleges, so that every summer they were either working with DOD, Department of Agriculture, and those, because there were offices all over the country, some of these students were, in far out places, learning about different cultures, as well as getting those internship opportunities. So really leverage for that anchor institution, getting those professors into the industries, into the businesses, talking to them about what work looks like today, not what it looked like when we created that syllabus initially.
Thank you, Emily. I think what we're talking about here is there are clear actions that our anchor institutions can take, that employers can take, but there's also some individual agency, particularly as we're talking about our college students and our graduate students on how to enter the workforce, how to set yourself apart, particularly given some of the challenges and barriers that we've talked about today. We are moving into the last part of the panel, and I'm getting questions from the audience. I will continue to receive questions from the audience. You can type it in Zoom or in Facebook or text your questions to 22333 and type JHUWL in the message. So I want to move us into the pathway forward. And you all have already given some very specific call to actions to our audience today. We have a very diverse group of individuals who've tuned in with us. This includes policymakers, elected officials, community members, students, faculty, business owners, and more. So I want to turn to each of you all individually. Whomever wants to start first, go ahead and kick off. What is your advice to these groups, or one piece of the one subpopulation within the groups that I named just now? What is your advice to them? And what is the call to action?
I'll go. I think that we have to make the advancement of women and people of color a business priority. We have to get them out of middle management and into leadership and executive level positions before we're really going to see a shift when it comes to the wealth gap. Lack of experience should no longer be the scapegoat, because it has for a very long time. We need to identify the barriers of bias and discrimination. We need to acknowledge their impact, and we need to rebuild our systems to be equitable and as free as possible from that bias. I think we also need to reevaluate the skills and the competencies that we look at when it comes to promotion eligibility, because that is a place where it presents a huge opportunity for bias to creep in. We need to make sure that those skills and competencies are objective, are fair, and are strictly related to ability to perform on the job. Serve as a mentor or a sponsor to a person of color who's seeking growth opportunities. Provide transfer and stretch assignments or other professional development opportunities so that the person can gain those additional skills and insights to be able to rise to the executive level. And then I think, to Emily's point, we really need to expose our children to the vast array of career options that are available to them at an early age. Let them know that it's not just about being a doctor or a lawyer. There are so many other positions that are fruitful and that are productive and that are enjoyable that you could take part in. And then lastly, I would say, Always, always, always negotiate. Whether it's a job offer, a raise, a promotion, even a $1,000 increase in your current compensation package right now can create exponential gains for you over the course of your career. So it's always important to make sure that you're advocating for yourself and demanding more.
Thank you. Maurice, what is your call to action? What's the advice that you'll give our audience today?
So look, our topic is employment and equity employment. My advice and my call to action is it is a team sport. Every audience member has a role. We need businesses to perfect a skills first approach to hiring and promoting. We need organizations who can train talent in communities, particularly communities of color and low wealth communities, to get them ready for these opportunities. Get them ready with the technical skills, get them ready with what I call the durable skills, some people call the soft skills. Get them ready to understand what it's like for some to enter corporate cultures for the first time in their lives. And we need organizations to bring the wraparound supports to coaches, mentors, childcare, transportation, mental wellness. We need all of those organizations involved in this ecosystem. And then most importantly, we need the talent that we have been talking with, partnering with, to get ready and to raise their hands and to go after opportunities, to seek mentors, to seek opportunities, to seek training to fill gaps. This is a team sport. And the real question is, can we field in Baltimore, in DC, in Atlanta, in Charlotte, in LA, in San Francisco, can we field a high functioning team that's devoted to employment and equity? If we can, the opportunities now, there are 10 million unfilled jobs in the country right now. The opportunities are huge.
Team sport, there's a role for all of us. Emily, what's your call to action? What's your advice?
I'll say to policymakers, you have a number of programs that are addressing employment to education to employment pipeline. Continue to invest in those, shore those up, use your metrics to get rid of the ones that aren't working and then put those resources back into that. Also, anything related to job skills and upskilling training. We've got all these jobs, 10 million jobs available. We've got to upskill people so that they can now get to their next level. So that's what I would say to policymakers. I would say to your university, your anchor institution leadership, be seen. You don't have to throw money at every program and say, I'll sponsor a table here and do that just so I can be seen. Show up, sit in the back pew, listen, hear what people are saying, how they're living and what they need, and then take that information back as you're trying to figure out how you can be the best neighbor possible. I'll say to employers, look after those who've been looking after you. There's been so much focus on people who are resigning, but what about your diehards, the people who've been riding with you from day one? Make sure you're reviewing their salaries on a regular basis to look for parity and opportunities to show them a little love instead of always throwing these signing bonuses at people who you're trying to bring in. And then I want to say to our individuals, you got to own your role in this. Make sure you're ready as much as you can get yourself ready. I absolutely agree with Maurice, is we will never be 100% ready for the job that we're going to have tomorrow. But make sure you've got yourself in a position and ready to be there, to argue for your role coherently and to show the confidence you need that you know you're a subject matter expert in whatever it is you want to do. That's so important. And please be willing to take risks. We sometimes sit in a place much too long because it's comfortable. And that's not what our colleagues that don't look like us do, right? I think that raising your hand that Maurice talks about is so important, but also be willing to walk out the door and enter a door with a culture that is accepting of you and who you are, and that has a plan for you and your future.
Well said, Emily. I do want to take a question from the audience to see if you can build on some of the points that you've made. I have a question in the chat. Often people are told that they need higher education or graduate degrees in order to guarantee employment or to take on debt to increase future wage potential. But with these barriers of entry, that's not always the case either. So how do we rectify this? What's your response to that?
Earlier.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to talk about what you said earlier, so you go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, I definitely think the skills first approach is the biggest piece of the answer here. Look, I was raised by a grandfather born in 1914 and went to school for 6 years in a barn. Denied the opportunity for any formal training because he was a colored child, as they said in those days. Grandmother born in 1919, went to school for 11 years in the segregated colored high school and got her diploma. These folks were the most transformative people in my life growing up. They were geniuses. What companies and the rest of us need to continue to recognize is unless we really move to a skills first approach, we're going to leave genius on the sideline, and we cannot be great as long as we leave genius on the sideline.
Well said, Maurice. I have another question in the chat specifically for you. You briefly mentioned in the beginning the role that HBCUs play in employment opportunities. Can you elaborate more on that? And what moves should more colleges make to ensure students are getting jobs post-graduation?
Yeah, so let me take the latter first. And I see schools doing it all the time, and I see HBCUs doing it aggressively. Building more partnerships with businesses, getting the students in front of businesses from day one. Internships, apprenticeships, networking events. That's really what the schools have to own with the students, is aggressively courting. Every student should have the opportunity to have a mentor in a business. And now you can do it. You can't use proximity as an excuse because you can mentor someone virtually very well. So that's what I would encourage our HBCUs. And for us, particularly since we're focusing on folks without a 4-year degree, our 2-year HBCUs are key pieces of the training infrastructure that we want to leverage.
Thank you. Emily, go ahead.
I'll just add one thing that all of our schools, our students need to stop doing is stop chasing a brand. When we talk about corporate America, everyone is thinking, I can only make money in Fortune 500. We all get caught up in that. And you got to learn how to read a 990. I can tell you the number of nonprofits, companies in this country that have a nonprofit designation where you're going to make more money sitting there than you will in some of these branded organizations where you're in middle management. But we keep thinking, and we hold up in our community, oh, they work for this brand, they must be this, they must be that. Where there are people who have just been really killing it in the nonprofit and the smaller to mid-sized company realm. And we're not talking to our students about how those opportunities matter and the benefits and the elevation you can get there, the appreciation and the cultures that you can get there are so critical. So I say this as a trustee at my alma mater, I say this all the time, we got to stop chasing the brands and start chasing the places that have been taking care of us throughout.
I love these comments. I think you all have given some clear, actionable steps that anybody in our audience can take from, whether you're a student, an employee, an employer, an executive, a people manager. There's a role for everybody in moving this work forward around economic justice. I have to thank you all for giving us your time today. your expertise, and most importantly, your passion around the work that you do every day, and sharing that with us on this virtual stage. So I want to make sure that our audience members can follow you all and the work that you're doing. Emily, you can follow her on LinkedIn or on Twitter at SHRM Emily. Maurice with OneTen, you can follow him on LinkedIn or on Twitter at Maurice OneTen or at OneTen. And Darah, her on LinkedIn or on Twitter at Darah Okeke. So we have some upcoming events related to the JustUs Dialogue Series and Symposium. We will continue again on Wednesday, March 30th with our investment panel, healthcare panel, and a fireside chat with Johns Hopkins University President Ron Daniels and Vice President for the Office of Economic Development, Ms. Alicia Wilson. Follow us on JH Connects at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And major thank you to our community partners, Johns Hopkins University, Johns Hopkins Health System, Microsoft, Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business, the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce, Buy Black, Johns Hopkins Health Education and Teaching Corps, and Hopkins Local. Thank you all so much, and everyone have a great day.